So, behavior-driven development and continuous delivery. Last March, George Dinwiddie and I we both had a little extra time and started talking about collaborating on something. And we ended up writing an article for the Functionize blog. George is an expert in behavior-driven development, and I'm not an expert in continuous delivery, but it's been my area of interest for the past few years. So we decided to collaborate and think about, could these different things help each other, and we think they can. So these are kind of, in a way, wacky and half-baked ideas, and that's why I think the discussion afterwards will be interesting. So for those of you who aren't already familiar with me and my donkeys here in Vermont, over the past 20 years, I've been a hands-on tester most of the time on Agile teams. And together with Janet Gregory, I'm so glad she joined us here today. We've written books and created a video course. And also we have a live training course, which is offered also remotely facilitated all around the world. And it's also translated into Spanish. So you can look at agiletestingfellow.com for that. And oh, I see I have a weird bug on my slides. Anyway, I think Janet's doing a course next month remotely, so that's a great opportunity right there. So you can find something friendly to your time zone. And at OutSystems, I've been there a few months now, and helping to build an observability practice, easy for me to say, and working with the quality team, helping the engineering teams become more autonomous with their testing. And reach out to me anytime, Lisa at agiletester.ca. And also I have a Test Automation U course, which I've kind of messed up that logo. But if you go to testautomationu.com, lots of great free courses there. So another great thing to take advantage of. And so we know short feedback loops are good for software development. And the teams I've been on over the years that did really well in successfully adopting continuous delivery also did behavior-driven development or acceptance test-driven development or specification by example. These are all three flavors of using business-facing tests to guide development. The teams that I was on that did not do these, like maybe they even did test-driven development, but they didn't use business-facing tests to guide development, they struggled to adopt continuous delivery, and I don't think that's a coincidence. So we'll look at some things your team might consider trying to get confidence to do that continuous delivery thing. So, you know, behavior-driven development, it's a tried and true way to build shared understanding of features and stories among team members in different roles and with the business stakeholders. And also you can bring people with a lot of different perspectives together and get different viewpoints to get a more rounded view of what you need to build. So let's look at some of the ways that BDD fits into and enables continuous delivery during this talk. And also, if you're not very familiar with continuous delivery and continuous deployment, this is a way to deploy small changes to production frequently at a sustainable pace. So some teams do this many times per day. Now, some teams don't want to deliver every day because or deploy every day because maybe it's disruptive to their customers or they may have different reasons. But the key to continuous delivery is you have a deployable build every day, whether or not you're actually putting it out in production. It's all the tests are passing and it's good to go. The difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment is with continuous delivery, there's a human decision. Are we going to deploy? With continuous deployment, when you commit a change and it runs through your deployment pipeline and everything passes, it's going to automatically deploy out to production. Doesn't mean it's going to release, because you can use things like release feature toggles to keep things hidden or maybe limited to a small group of people before you decide to release it and make it generally available. So we're going to look at that a little more closely. So this is an example of a deployment pipeline, and I've got manual steps in yellow because guess what? Your code's path to production probably includes some manual or human-centric activities. And when we look at the deployment pipeline, though, we're only seeing the build and release and deploy part of that DevOps loop. We're not seeing the part that goes on the left side of that loop, which are things that are less automatable, more likely to be error prone, more chances for misunderstandings and miscommunication. Those are the planning and coding activities. So Janet just came up with this really beautiful graphic for the DevOps and continuous testing loop, inspired by Dan Ashby's famous graphic on that. And I love the rainbow colors. I think her granddaughter helped with this also. But you know, we know software development is not linear. And so we need to cover both sides of that loop. It's really important. And I think that's one way that BDD and CD can work together. So I'd like you just to take a minute. I'd say it's hard to do interactive things with these kind of talks now, but we have a chat on Zoom. So do you have any ideas yourself, especially those of you who are more experienced with BDD or ATDD, on how that can help shorten the feedback loop? So I'll just give you a minute to think about that, write down some ideas. Me talking to you isn't going to help you learn very much, but if you start thinking about how you might use this information, you'll get more ideas. Yeah, and anybody who has a clarifying question, if I say use a term you don't understand or need more explanation, feel free to, if Bertold, if you don't mind watching the chat and asking those questions,
So
I don't mind being interrupted.
Came in, you know, build the right idea feature more quickly from William. Macker said that Catherine said a problem well stated is half solved. BDD allows us to frame our outcomes up front rather than in flight.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'll share a few of the things that George and I came up with for this, you know, continuous learning loop. So a lot of you have probably heard the term 3 Amigos meetings. Janet and I call it Power of 3 in our books, but same kind of idea. We get a product person, a programmer, and a tester together, getting all those viewpoints. And nowadays I find you may want a designer in there, you may want a database expert, operations expert. You don't want too big of a group because you can't have a good conversation with too big of a group. But these would be meetings you do right before your iteration planning or sprint planning to talk through all your stories and make sure that you understand the goal of each story, the business rules, and how those things should behave. And a lot of times subtle differences pop up that we may not notice otherwise until after the software was built. So for example, let's say we're working on a timesheet application for a delivery company, and the drivers are going to record the time that they spend driving. So we might think of questions like, well, should we report the time in hours, in minutes, in both? And what about overtime? And, you know, what about the time they spend commuting from home, whatever? So lots of questions are going to come up that people may not have thought about before. And you can also talk about how you're going to test these different capabilities. And things like accessibility testing, security, all these different quality attributes. How are we going to make sure this is operable? What are we going to monitor? How do we need to instrument our code for observability? What do we need to know once it's in production? So there are a lot of different ways to structure these conversations. I like the 7 product dimensions from Ellen Gottesdiener and Mary Gorman. Structured conversations, context diagrams, state diagrams, all kinds of things. Here's an example mapping. This is from Matt Wynn, and it's just one way to structure one of these types of meetings. So we have a story. What's the goal? I didn't put the goal on here, but what's the goal of the story? What are our business rules? And then for each business rule, we want at least one example of how that should behave, and maybe some examples of how it shouldn't behave, what should happen when there are errors. But whatever you use, just last week, my team needed to plan a really kind of complicated new project that we're doing next. And, you know, the tendency has been to talk about the stories while looking at Jira. I don't find Jira a very good tool for enabling conversations. So we got a Google Jamboard, and my teammates had never seen it before, and you can do sticky notes and you can draw on it. So pretty soon we had identified risks and goals and drawn architecture diagrams and all kinds of things. The act of doing those visuals helps you think better. Our brains work better when we move and when we talk to each other and when we write things. It's harder to do virtually, but we can do it thanks to all these awesome tools. So it doesn't have to be any specific tool, but something where that people can write or type or draw is really ideal. And so what you end up with in this BDD process is you take your examples and you create executable tests that guide development. Now, even if you never automated these tests, they would still be valuable because it's clear to everybody how the code should behave. Seb Rose and Gaspar Nagy in their books, Discovery, and they've got a formulation book also coming out. They use the term business-readable specification. I really like that term. We're sharing that understanding across the whole organization. And so other benefits that you get if you're practicing behavior-driven development or acceptance test-driven development is we're doing exploratory testing of feature ideas and story ideas even before we've written any code. That's the best time to catch problems and misunderstandings. And it's also going to mean less rework, less chance of the product owner rejecting the story after we've done all the work, and shorten cycle time. And I found this true on my teams. When we started doing behavior-driven development, we saw that cycle time come down, we saw the rejection rate come down. And it helps us learn how to slice our stories small and consistently, which is really good for that whole frequent change idea with continuous delivery. So let's pause again for a minute. And can you think of any ways continuous delivery enhances behavior-driven development? How does it improve your ability to do that practice well? So again, if you want to share any ideas in the chat, just think about that for a minute. I'm really disappointed my cat hasn't joined me. A couple weeks ago, I let my donkey join me for a Q&A session with a meetup talk. That was fun.
Tom Dyer is saying that can get rapid feedback. Mora, Slavine, I think of that the way to do it before a lot of code is written. William saying faster iteration lets you learn from user behavior more quickly by seeing changes. Luis Santos says you are thinking outcome-driven features and therefore you will be more focused.
Yeah.
Jacqueline, clear rules and understand. Marila Utsuk, less amount of surprise before deployment.
Definitely. Cool. Well, I'll share some of the things that George and I thought about. Well, I really like the principles of continuous delivery. This book, Continuous Delivery from Jez Humble and Dave Farley, I think it's 10 years old now. I think they just have their 10-year anniversary of release. And it's interesting that some books like this just never actually get old. They remain relevant. I like to think Janet's and mine do too, because they're just based on principles, on values, on things that we can keep using no matter what changes in our technology. And I think that these principles are the heart of behavior-driven development as well, and the heart of Agile and Agile testing for that matter. And it really takes the whole team working together. So that's when the magic happens. So we want to know, somebody mentioned this on the chat, we want to know if the feature is valuable to customers. How do they use it? Once we release it, we can see, do they use it? What problems do they have? How did it impact other parts of the system? So being able to get these things out to production and get that feedback faster really helps us improve our feature ideas more quickly. And some of these things are hard to even test in a non-production environment. It's really hard these days to simulate the production environments of our elastically scalable distributed systems. So, so this fast feedback feeds into our behavior-driven development process as we plan our new changes. And we get the scenarios that we come up with in our 3 Amigos meetings and our writing our tasks are, the examples are more realistic. We know more about what really happens. And you know, it could be, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, that users do things we didn't even expect. We didn't anticipate them, we didn't test them, we didn't plan for them. And it could also be that some of the scenarios we thought of are not what they wanted. So again, this is something we can learn, getting our thin learning releases out there and getting that fast feedback, we can improve those things faster and not waste time on things that people didn't want. So we're really solving our customer problems. So we can keep modifying our suite of scenarios, our automated regression tests, to make sure we're meeting the needs of the users and that we don't break the ones that they like using. So I recently watched Abby Bangser's QConfess talk, which is available. All the QConfess talks are available free, which is really nice of them because the conference costs money. So she talked about using BDD to talk about production and monitoring and the agreements we make with our customers for how much uptime the system has and how reliable it is. So for those of you who aren't familiar with these terms, with service level agreement, those are the agreements you make with your customer. And if you're down more than X number of minutes a year, you have to pay them money. So the service level objective is more of a target. What do we feel defines our system being reliable and being available? And the service level indicators are the metrics we use to track that. And Abby suggests that we need to have conversations to prioritize and set realistic goals for these things. I thought that was really insightful. So that's kind of another dimension, actually using BDD as we come up with these metrics and objectives and agreements. So she suggested using example-based questioning to identify the metrics that we're going to use, to write scenarios as we do in BDD for our features or application features, write scenarios for our service level objectives. And again, cross-department collaboration, get everybody involved in these conversations, because there may be somebody assuming that we have a particular goal for our reliability or availability, but they didn't say it, and so it's not happening. So it just reveals those hidden assumptions. And we can also do some automation for faster feedback. She also talked about being able to test these out in non-production environments and really focusing more on doing that. And again, that can be really hard to do, but there are ways you can test subsets of it. So watch her talk. I just threw that in there because I think it's so important. All right, so once again, we'll take a little bit of time and just based on what I've covered so far, see if you can jot down a few things that your team might try based on what we talked about so far.
So more saying correct small errors before they become bigger or create bigger problems.
That's a good one.
I'll be waiting for it. One thing I really liked that you pointed out is, and often forgotten, is this cross-departmental nature, defining them. That is so true. Engineering may think that something is all fine, and then while there is the different perception on the other side of the aisle. So.
Well, yeah, and a lot of times it's like the business stakeholders are like, well, didn't you realize that we needed much faster response time than that? Or didn't you know how many people would be on the system? Well, no, we didn't, because you didn't say. And I find now that I'm working for a much larger organization than I'm used to, boy, it's a big challenge, because these departments are big and they're not always talking to each other. So we have to build those bridges.
Yes. So William is saying better understand our users and what they will perceive as high quality, shifting testing right and observing their behaviors. And Tom is saying notify stakeholders when deploying to staging in order to validate functionality.
Awesome. Well, I will share some of the things I think might be good to try. So I've been on teams that they're trying to get to continuous delivery with some varying degrees of success, but not yet doing behavior-driven development or acceptance test-driven development or any flavor of using those business-facing tests to guide development. So try a little experiment. And I did this when I was on the Pivotal Tracker team a few years ago. Well, I tried to do it for a long time, and then finally a couple of developers got interested too. So then we actually got to try it. Learn more about behavior-driven development, the good practices around it, And try having an Amigos meeting before your next iteration planning meeting. Let's keep it to a half hour. It doesn't have to be a big amount of time. And for each story, talk about what's the purpose, what problem is that story solving, what are the business rules and the examples to illustrate the business rules, and then write some scenarios based on those. And again, it doesn't even mean I know teams that haven't gotten yet to automating these tests, which is a nice side benefit because you get automated regression tests. You know for sure when you're done and when everything's working. But even if you don't do that, you're going to get that shared understanding. And it also may help you slice those stories down really nice and small for those frequent small changes that we need for continuous delivery. So other teams might be doing some version of guiding development with business-facing tests, but not yet adopted continuous delivery, and you're wanting to work towards that. It seems to be the popular thing of the moment. We all want to do CD. Sit down and make a visual map or a value stream map of the path your code takes to production. And even if none of that is automated yet, there's still a path, even if you're doing it manually. Start talking about it. Then start looking at where are the bottlenecks, where are the handoffs, where are people waiting for somebody else to finish something. They have these dependencies. And start looking at the biggest places that you could save your time and get faster feedback. Think about what you can automate. And again, you know, I talked about how your pipeline has manual or human-centric testing activities. Build exploratory testing into your pipeline so you can explore those unknown unknowns that you didn't maybe think of during your Amigos meetings. And just see how you can continually improve and get those small changes into production. Katrina Cloakey's book, A Practical Guide to Testing in DevOps, which is available on LeanPub, she really has a big section on building relationships, building those bridges to not only people within your team, but other teams and other parts of the company. Get everybody thinking about quality, get everybody thinking about what you can do to improve. And this is quite general. It doesn't just apply to BDD and continuous delivery, but I think without these relationships, it's harder to succeed at those practices. And, you know, building that trust with people and helping each other really ramps up the learning and improvement. I mean, we know from science nowadays, with all the studies being done by people like Amy Amundsen and stated DevOps surveys, that psychological safety is a prerequisite. And some people think, oh, that's just unicorn land. But you can see from the state of DevOps report year by year, more and more teams and more companies are getting there. So having good leadership that know how to serve and support people and help them do their best work. Get out. Sometimes that just means getting out of their way. That's what Agile was always supposed to be about. That's what DevOps is supposed to be about. And by embracing practices like BDD and continuous delivery, I think this all works together to help us get there. So talk about it with your team. How can you build more shared understanding before you write code? How can you slice your stories down? How can you shorten your cycle time, get those faster feedback loops, and that continuous delivery of small pieces of value to your customers continually? So I do have some resources that I referred to in this talk that I highly recommend. And again, feel free to get in touch with me anytime, and I hope we can have a good discussion about this right now. So that is all I have.